since there's nothing going on.
What?
We timed out. They didn't think anything was going on.
Even so, it looks like it's actually off. Yeah. Is it coming? I'm just giving it a minute. We're actually, as with a lot of these videos, we're videotaping, waiting for the TV to come on. It says no signal. Is that the true? Let's give it a minute and see if it comes. If it doesn't, I don't know. While you're waiting, if you wanted to start idle, you can. And the easiest way to do that, so I'll zoom, is to, in Cortana, just type ID or IDL. Why is that not finding the signal? This one is.
On the wrong
Channel.
like the wrong channel or something.
Boy, that's big. Let's go back down a little. Little chaos for the beginning of the week. Let me see if anyone's around to fix that. If not, we may have to live without. So they're looking into that. Let's start anyway. So, as I said, usually what we want to do here, this is the interactive, and sometimes it's a good place to test things, but generally we're going to create a new file. So I'm going to do File, New File, and we'll make it so that it'll run when we execute, as opposed to running it line by line as we go through. Hi, do you know what channel that's supposed to be on or anything? That one's working, that one's not. Anyway. Now the other one just went out. There, it came back.
Was this on this morning?
What?
Was this on this?
No, neither of them was on. Neither of them were on. Yes, Python idle is. Okay, nothing like a slow, chaotic start to the day. It's been that way all morning, so we'll see how.
That traffic you have to deal with to get here is amazing.
Yeah, normally I don't have to deal with it because normally I take the train.
Oh.
Normally I drive to Puyallup, catch the train in Puyallup, bring it to the here, and then catch the light rail up to the hill. It's not that bad. But yeah, driving in on when you actually do drive in. Oh, you got it. Thank you.
So 2. Why 2?
I don't. It's 2. Okay, that's what. Thank you.
Huh?
All right. So one of the things I'm going to do, and as I said, I want to kind of encourage you guys to do, if you notice when we look at the assignments, they all have a point or so attached to this, is to do this initial documentation. So this is going to be, it's what they call the chaos program. It's from chapter 1. And if you want it, I mean, it would be good. Basically, it just shows you how simple iterations can go wildly different. There's a whole mathematics devoted to chaos and fractals and all of that, but one of the principles is that even with the same equation, as the variables change, they can go very widely apart. It's not predictable, actually, where they'll go. That's where turbulence arises and things like that. If you're into science, luckily it's a really simple equation in this case. So, I mean, how much explanation you do on the top is up to you. One of the things, so at least like one statement about what the program does, or even at least what program it is in the book. So you could do like, this is, I think our first chapter 2 point something for what the assignment is. And then your name, even though it'll be pretty clear to me because of the way you turn things in, and I'll show you how to turn things in here in a bit. And then a date is good. I don't grade on dates, but it is good. Today is the 28th. So, I mean, I just want you to get the feel and the habit of putting some kind of heading on these. Again, it's a fairly typical thing. If you're working as a programmer, you'll be required to put in headings. They will also give you certain naming conventions, which I will try to show you. With Python, the usual naming conventions are lowercase at the beginning, camel case, right? Things for variables and method names. They vary a little bit language to language, what the naming conventions are. In C#, all of the methods start with capital letters. In Java, they all start with lowercase letters. And in Python, they tend to do lowercase letters too. It doesn't make any difference to the compiler, but it's just for a consistency. So one of the things we'll do, and this is, we're going to do this a lot. I'm going to do a def main. It has a parentheses. Now we'll talk it and a colon. I keep wanting to do a semicolon. I've been doing too many other languages lately, but a colon. So what happens here is we're defining a function. In a couple, 3 weeks, we'll talk about building other functions, right? Main is usually the starting point. With some languages, again, like Java or C# or something like that, main is the starting point, period. You have to have a main to start. But with Python, you don't have to have a main to start. If you just wrote your code in the middle here, it would run. But it's a good idea to create this sort of beginning function. I'm going to try to teach you some good habits and structured habits. When you're doing this, this is how Python does starting a block, right? You give it particularly a function block. We're defining it. We're doing a main parentheses in case you pass in arguments, and we'll do that later, but not today. Did you have a question?
You just answered it.
What? I just answered it. Why the parentheses?
Well, no, just what the point of it doing it then is.
Oh, yeah.
It's the start of a code block. So.
It's the start of a code block. In Python, code blocks start typically with a colon. So an if statement will start with a colon, and a loop will start, well, you do the description of the loop, and then you do a colon. And then the next thing is, and idle does this for you, so with Visual Studio and most things, is it gives you an indentation. And everything that's indented after that colon is part of that block. This took a while for me to get used to because most of the languages that I play with don't care where you put them. White space doesn't matter. But here it does, at least the initial white space here. Yeah.
If I were to do this and I put a red thing there just so that I could.
Oh, comment?
Can I put a comment after it?
Yes, you can. So you could do.
And it wouldn't disrupt the thing.
No, it's pretty good about ignoring. So it'll ignore the comments. And actually, it's a good idea to comment. You know, that's perfectly fine.
Okay, thank you.
What happens if there's a space between lines?
It shouldn't matter, but I would experiment. I think it's not the space between lines that matters. I think it's the indentation.
Yeah.
So, ouch. Sorry, I just twinge in my leg there for whatever reason. So this, at the beginning, what they have here is print. And this is in the book. It's on page 16, if you wanted to follow it there. And it gives a little description. You know, this program illustrates a chaotic function. They spell it right, though. Okay, and then end quote and in that. So there's nothing, and you don't have to do anything, you know, to say that the line is terminated except press enter, right? One of the things to know, when you press enter, you can't see it, but that is a code. It's a letter code inside of there. So it's the end of line character that determines the end of the command line. Does that make sense? So this is a really simple command, and it's also a function. Yeah.
So does that mean if we were using idle, it would show like a something like a semicolon or some other thing?
I've never seen a IDE that shows you the enter key thing.
Oh, I see. Oh, okay, it's the actual. Enter.
It's the actual symbol
okay,
for the enter. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
The only time I see is when you have like DOS to Unix, you got the caret M.
You can do. There are some environments where you can see all of your keys. You know, so you can see the tabs, you can see the things, but generally you don't see.
It's dangerous. So.
Yeah. Well, years ago with I remember when you could. They used to have these Norton utilities where you could scan the binary code. You know, and yeah, you can do some terrible things. This is a function too. It's a built-in. It's part of Python, right? But it has that parentheses, just like this has a parentheses, and this is an argument that goes into that parentheses. So into that function, the function's parentheses. Print as a function can take anything that can be output as a string, basically. And because Python is loosely typed, does anybody know what that means?
You don't have to worry about like floaters or integers.
Right, you don't have to name the type. Like in Java or something, you would have to say, you'd have to declare, this would be a literal string, but if you were to make a variable, you have to say that it's a string, you have to say that it's an integer, you have to say that it's a double. You don't have to do that in Python. There are times when you will want to, and we might get to those. Python will interpret what you do. It'll know that this is a string. It's in quotes, right? It's a literal string, just a series of characters. When it looks at a number, and we might look at this a little bit later, if it doesn't have a decimal part, it assumes that it's a integer. If it has a decimal point, it assumes that it's a float. It has actually very few data types compared to a lot of languages. But there are times when it will misinterpret what you're doing. So then you might want to specify what the type is. It's like JavaScript that way. Actually, JavaScript does the same thing. So anyway, we're printing it out, and it's also a good idea to give the user some idea of what's going on. Right? So prompts and things are a good idea. for the user. Most of what we're going to do is going to be kind of console based, which means that it's just going to run in this, but there are some forms that we'll do, some pictures and graphics. We'll talk about those probably even next week. There's a graphics library that this book's used, and I'll talk a little bit about it when we get there. So it won't all be just console, but a lot of it will be. In real life, console is usually only used for things like low-level system things, you know, shell programming, like in Linux, things like that. All right. So the next thing is just to create a variable, and they just use X, so I'm going to kind of follow it. And this time I'll get the eval in the right place, input. And I think later there are ways, if you do define what your data types are, you don't necessarily have to use eval, if I recall. When the first part of the input here is a prompt, and it's basically enter a number between 0 and 1. So because it has to be between 0 and 1, you know that it will be a decimal. Although the computer doesn't know that at this time. So a couple of things. One is I usually try to leave a space at the end of this because otherwise the number will be right at the end of it. We open 2 parentheses, so it's important to open, close 2 parentheses, right? You have to have everything open as closed. Eval is a function, right, that takes arguments. One of the arguments that it can take is an input. Maybe the only argument it can take is an input. It evaluates what we enter for this input to see if it can be, actually, if it can be a number. I don't know if it'll fail if it's not. X is not defined as anything. It's just a variable, right? These are some of the things that kind of bother me about loosely typed languages sometimes.
What if you only put X equals input and that eval?
Then it would just treat it as a string no matter what.
Yeah.
Even if you entered the number 9 or something, it would just treat it as a
So
character.
the evals or numbers mostly?
Eval is usually used when you need to convert it to a number. What I'm not sure of, and we could play with this, is what happens if it fails, if it can't convert it to a number. Well, let's do that after we make it work. We'll see what happens if we try to make it not work. I'm sure it will fail. If not here, it'll fail in the next line where you do the equation. Oops. Again, I don't think that break would matter. I think you can break between lines as long as the indentation is the same. So what they do here, and it's interesting, I'm not sure of this in the book, they introduce a loop. And we talked about that a little bit last time. For, and they do I in range 10. One of the things that this does do, notice there's different ways that this can be written. We looked at this a little bit in the help last time, but I just wanted to show you that the Intellisense here tells you is also, you can do stop, which is what we're going to do. If I just close it at 10, that means go 10 times, period. You can also do a start stop. So you could do start at 1 and stop at 10, or start at 2 and stop at 10, you know, whatever you want. And then the step is like if you wanted to count by 2s or count by 3s, you could do that, right?
You could also then,
so if you
I would
said
presume you could also then count by like 0.5 if you wanted.
you could probably do, yeah, no, I think so. That's actually a good question. Does it allow non-integers as counters? I'm not sure. That's again something we can experiment with. A lot of languages don't allow. A lot of the languages, this function is written to do only integers, but you might be able to count by step 5. And I think you could count by minus. So you can count backwards.
Oh, like start at 10,
Yeah.
do the range like 10, comma, 1.
So if you did, yeah, so 10, comma 1 minus 1, and you should be able to do 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. We can try that in a minute too. All right, so I'm going to just do in range 10. Now again, this is a block, right? So this is another block. A loop is a block. It has code under it. What are we looping? And that's why the colon there. And there will be another level of indentation. So it's indented even more here, right? Because this is the indent for the loop. Does that make sense? And then what they have is X. And I actually discourage generally, although this is just math, so you could do probably X. I usually encourage making variable names be meaningful and a little bit longer. If you do too many X's and I's and things like that, particularly in a longer program, it gets really hard to tell what they mean. So it's a good idea to give a variable a name that means something. And a variable name can be, I'm not sure in Python what the limits are, but it's usually around 255 characters as a max. They can't have any spaces in them, but they can have underscores. So to do the equation, 3.9. I haven't memorized it, so I'm looking at it. Times X. There's a lot that they do right here that they haven't talked about yet, which I've wondered about in this book, but things that come up in later chapters. So I'm going to space this. The spacing doesn't matter in here, but it makes it look more readable. So if you haven't done computer math, you guys know what the asterisk stands for? Multiplication. Yeah. And it follows the same rules of my brain just went order of operations. It follows the same order of operations as algebra. So this is done first, and you have to put it in parentheses because it would otherwise it would do this, and then minus x, and you want to remove the x before you do the multiplication. So whatever is in parentheses has priority. If you have nested parentheses, the most innermost parentheses, then you work your way out. And then multiplications left to right, additions and subtractions left to right. There are a few others in there, which we might talk about, modulus, and modulus is basically on the same priority as the that. I don't know if it has an exponential. I will look. A lot of them just use a power function. I'll have to look and see if there's an exponential operator. Okay, so then what we do, there's only one more line in this. It's, as I said, very print x.
Is X not in parentheses?
It should be, yes. I would have noticed that in a second, maybe. All right. And then the other thing we want to do is, is just to run the main program, the main function. And to run a function, any function, as I said when we make our own, you just name the function. Empty parentheses if there's no arguments, or if there are arguments, like print has, you add the arguments to the inside the parentheses. We'll do that later. Let's see if this runs. It's going to ask us to save it. If we try to run it, it's going to say, so I'm going to run, and I'll just say run module, and it says it has to be saved. So I'm going to do OK to save it. I'm going to go to documents, and I made a Python program, remember? So there's hello and prime. I'm going to just call this one chaos. If you need that zoomed, I could zoom the dialog. So then it runs, and it tells me to enter a number between 0 and 1. So if I do 0.4, it gives out these list of numbers. And notice it does 10 of them. It does 10 loops. And what the point of this is that, notice this is 93, 23, 69, 82, 97, 95. They really don't have any kind of sequence. Your numbers will probably be different, right? They won't be the same. Well, are they the same? They are the same? Okay.
Why would they be different?
I don't know why. My brain is shut. They're doing the same function, so it should be. If you do a different number, the thing is that they go wildly astray and they're not very predictable. Right. Yeah. Oh, so save it. I saved it in documents. You can name it, yeah, whatever you want. It'll put a PY at the end of it. Oh, you need to call me. Yeah.
I am there.
All right. What's that? X is not defined. So. Oh, is X not defined?
No.
Eval tells us, eval tells it that it's looking for a number. If you don't put eval, it is going to treat what you enter as a string, and then the text string rather than looking for a number.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And how did you do
Maybe.
Did you leave a colon or
That's a capital X.
you do not open or close it?
Negative lower X.
No, it's just like it's having trouble with the notes I have.
So enter a number.
Wait, print X.
Oh, you have a. You're missing an X.
Maybe it's that space. It could be. Yeah, oh, that's why. I was pushing it. Yep, there was a weird space.
Oh, yes.
And a shortcut.
What?
You're still, you
No,
got.
no, it's gotta go in. It's gotta indent.
Oh, it
So,
was, yeah.
wait,
So this is case sensitive. So if you do a capital X in the print and a lowercase x up above, it won't know what it is.
it's do run.
Anyone else on this side? You guys all okay? Oh.
It's like an enter.
Maybe there's something after this, right before that. Trying to leave it after 10.
After,
Oh, you forgot the colon. See the colon? It's got to define that there's a, so put a colon after the 10.
here.
Yep. There you go. Now run.
Remind me, I got it.
Thank you.
0.4.
Yay, it's not working anymore. The colon.
So basically, that's what we're signing up to,
Okay.
is finding mistakes, or making mistakes and then finding them for the rest of our lives. That's pretty much it.
Great. I love it.
Like an accountant or something. So, for more
With really
money
cool toys.
and more money.
Yeah.
So.
I like putting those.
Yeah.
So I can look back.
I'm gonna just, like copy that and then put it right into the.
Yeah.
There we go.
You can probably save it in your browser, right? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go file this, file, save. And then I'm going to, which I've been doing this, opening this. And new file. File upload, and then put it in there. But then can I read it at home?
That's why I was just gonna copy it into the document.
Look at you. Wait, can you paste it into-
Well, if you have,
Can you paste it in Python?
I don't know the answer.
I think you have to copy it in.
Probably.
Gotcha.
Also, I feel like if you have Python at home on your computer, if you just upload it as a.
Anyone else?
This document, you'd be fine. But, yeah. If you have your,
So we'll do a couple of other little play things here, but let me go back to the other one.
I'll say that.
Are there any questions on this, that now that we did it? It's basically just doing this 10 times, right? Yeah, here's the work. So the close of Maine is just that I back over to the margin again.
Whoa.
Before I didn't put Maine, so mine didn't run.
That's right, yeah.
So you have to call out the Maine.
oh, nice.
You have to call it. Basically what this is doing is it's calling this. This is just defining what Maine is, but it isn't running.
File. Open.
When I call Maine, then it runs what we defined here. Def here is for definition. We're defining what is the content of Maine. Here we call it to run. Does that make sense? Now, as I said, it would work. I'm going to make a couple of just new files just to, so I'm going to do a new file. And I'm going to show you that it would work just fine if I, instead of doing this, I just did this. So I'm going to copy that to here. I think though this needs to go back. Okay, so I'm going to run. And notice it ran just fine. Didn't even ask me to save it, actually. So one of the things, it will run. Actually, it shouldn't have done that. Let me see if it does it now. Run module. Yeah, it has to be saved. I think it was saying that before. Why doesn't it go to where the others were?
You got to say one of those nebulous Windows preferences.
Yeah. No, you might be able, there might be something in Python, a config file too. I'm going to just say no main. All right, and then when I run it, see it's running just fine without the main. So, as I said, I'm just trying to show you good habits by doing the main.
Oh yeah, since we're noobs.
Yeah.
I thought that they have put successfully even if you enter a number way long.
Oh, sure. There's nothing, it doesn't know what you're looking for. So if you enter a wrong number, although you do get, some of you got the INF. I think what that means is it's out of bounds,
Yeah.
right? The number's too big or too small. It's out of bounds.
I got numbers that are up to 210th power.
So yeah, you can play with this, and you should probably. All right, so one of the things that I wanted to do with this, and since we're right here, might as well do it with this version, is what happens. Oh, that didn't work. Why didn't that work? Okay, there it goes. What happens if you put in like 1? Yeah, it should crash. Let's do it in quotes and see what happens. I'm just testing things right now.
We typed in 10NE or ONE. No, you just put wrong here. You have to put ONE.
So it still doesn't,
Oh,
it doesn't crash at the X. It doesn't crash at the assignment, right, because of the loosely typed. It crashes because you can't multiply things by 1, the word 1. So it crashes in the equation. That's what I was curious about, actually.
Why did we use 3.9? Or is it just random?
So I think it's part of, is that a quadratic?
And then we subtracted x from 1.
Right. I think it's just a basic, I mean, this is like a computer science thing, so I think it's a basic math equation, for chaos. There's certain kinds of quadratic equations that produce chaotic results. Okay. They actually use these kinds of things for when they're producing Mandelbrots and stuff, because you can't predict where each dot will go, but they find as you go deeper and deeper and do enough of them that they start to form self-repeating patterns. So, yeah, I don't know if that's, the author does not actually explain this.
3.14, 14159.
I can't go any further than that.
C6.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
But yeah.
Right, so one of the things that I had to do when I took it out of the, these are in the underlying file, so don't count those things. Let me move it over just a little bit to hide those. See how I moved everything over to the margin? Because indents matter in Python. Indents are how you determine what's a root level command versus what's a part of a block. It's a little bit weird. As I said, for most of my 25 years, what determined that was where the semicolon was, or where the curly braces were. This is a little bit different. So it does it by indentation. I think the idea of that when they were developing the language is that this is a lot faster to type, right? It just, you don't have to worry about those semicolons and curly braces. It's just easier to type. I think it's one reason why it's really popular with because you can sit down and it's pretty easy to move fairly quickly.
Easier to read, and thus easier to interpret.
Yeah, we shift brackets and braces on other funky stuff, or it's just enter indent space.
You don't
So with the text there, you can put spaces faster.
So one of the things I'm going to do, I'm going to make another one. I'm just going to do a couple of quick experiments, partially because these are the kinds of things that I would like.
Hey, we got a bug in the code.
Like you.
We got a bug? Oh, a real bug. They sometimes claim that the term bug came from a bug in the wiring of one of the original computers, although I've also heard that's apocryphal. So.
Didn't Bryce Hopper coin that term?
I'm not sure. So I'm going to do a new file. This is just a test. So I just want to do a couple of for loop tests, and then what we'll do is we'll do the conversion. We'll actually do the pure programming thing, and then we'll do version. So I was just curious. I'm going to do for I in range, and I'm going to do the 10, 1, minus 1, colon, print I with a parentheses. So theoretically, this should show a countdown from 10 to 1. In fact, we could go, if we want to go all the way to 0, I could change that to 0. So I'm going to run it. It's going to ask me to save it. So I will save it. I'll do a countdown. Oh, it went to the right place this time. That's because the other one was there. I'm just going to call it countdown pi. And it did. It did what I expected, which is nice reinforcement. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3.
Oh, I got that.
So let me look at the, show the code again. Whoa, come on, I just want to move this.
Print off.
Yeah, so print I. We're printing the counter.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this range here, is it work more like how like a classic would work?
I think it's pretty much the classic for
Yeah.
loop. Yeah, there are some while loops as well, but yeah, this is a counted loop. Now I believe. Let's see if this works. So I'm going to do a second loop. So first of all, I'm going to say that, let's just say x equals 5. And I'm going to do a for I in range. And what I'll do this time, just I'll count upwards, but I'll do count up at 1x colon print I. And so I'm just saying you can enter a variable in there, I believe, too, for that. So I'm going to run module, have to save it. I do OK. So I got 10. I got the 10 minus that, and then it starts at the bottom again. See if I can get down there. And it does. So this is the end of the first countdown. I should put another print there just to make a space. And then it starts up 1, 2, 3, 4. It doesn't include 5. Does that make sense? It doesn't when it counts until it is.
Right. Just like if you, when the countdown, if you do 10, 1, minus
Right.
1, it only goes to 2.
So does that make sense? I mean, we're going to deal with those more later, but they're good to play with. Here's something you could play with real quickly, whether you want to do it in def main or not here, would be to, it would be pretty easy. What if you wanted to print out 20 of these? Just change it to 20, yeah. Let me show you the peer exercise. We'll do it real quick, and then we'll start doing that one more thing that we'll look at in terms of the first assignment.
Oh, Whitespace is just for readability. And it goes, the range starts at 1 and stops at 5.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So the idea of these peer programs, the way you're supposed to do it if you do it strictly, and I'm not going to hold you too strictly, but strictly is you should have a pair of people working together. One person writing the code and one person giving advice, right? This isn't too hard. And even if you don't make it work, if you will both upload it, you'll get the points. I'm not taking any points off. I may make comments to say what you could have done to make it work, but I will not, and we'll talk about it afterwards too. So there's no risk here. right? It's just to practice things, to play with things. Again, it's best to do it in pairs, but if you want to do it alone, I don't care too much. This first one is basically just modifying this chaos program so that the user gets to say how many numbers to count. Right? So when we're doing this for this, instead of 10, it's whatever number the user wants. Does that make sense? I don't think that'll take you too long or be too difficult. But why don't you give it a shot, and then we'll talk about it. I'm going to give you 10 minutes. Do you want more? Do you think 10's enough? More?
Should they also still put a number? Or how?
So you can put it. I mean, basically, you're going to tell them how many.
Go off.
What?
What did I do? So I decided that I would take x equals 5 out and replace it with x equals eval and then put the input, right?
Right.
Did I do something? Did I forget something up here? Because it's now only, I put in the number 25. I expected it to go nuts.
Well, I think what's happening, all right, so it runs this. Then it runs, oops, I'm sorry. I think these are touch. So it runs Maine,
And then it runs this.
and then it runs that.
But then,
Right, so we have to make this and that's a variable of that.
oh, okay, here we go. I'm gonna do 25. Oh, so this only goes 1 to 25. Oh, okay. All right, I was expecting it to go 25 to
That would be why.
But you said,
1,000, but I said
but you
it's
said the range was, they could enter any number up to 1,000.
up to 1,000. Okay, thank you. It worked.
Yeah.
I understand the concept.
Yes, just say why.
Yeah, it's like right there. So remember the chaos program that we just did? This is essentially it. I mean, you could do it in the def main. You just want to change this program a little bit so that a user can say how many loops. So instead of just doing 10 loops, you want to ask the user how many loops they want to do. And then they enter a number, and then you do that. Does that make sense? Give it a shot. As I said, there's no. Yeah, you can just upload it. When you're done, whether it works or not, as I said, we'll go over this in just a minute. I'll give you 10
We're supposed to be
minutes.
doing this in pairs?
You should be doing it in pairs. I'm not going to be strict about it.
So we just have to. Oh,
All right,
that
I did
one,
it.
for some reason, I was all like touching it, it didn't work, and this one is all touchy.
So I'm going to
Really want-
change my canvas to student view.
Enter a number between 0 and 1. Great, enter a number between 0 and 500.
So when you're done, there's a couple ways, there's several ways you can turn this in.
Yeah, it should ask.
Although I could wait a minute to do that, I
I
guess.
certainly did that.
Yeah, it's not hard.
Well, look, I just changed what I did,
Yeah.
and I just put I.
Okay, good.
Not only am I gonna be smart. So,
It should ask for two.
Better watch for one person. Not
and
everyone.
my assignment's done now?
It should.
For this one, then we'll talk about the actual assignment. This is just a
Yeah,
quickie
I
thing to
think
do
what
in
you're
class.
asking is
So you got it. You've got
I
it.
keep editing on the same one. I sent you that link yesterday. Was that problematic?
No, it was all right. Well, actually, let me look. I'm not sure if I opened the link.
You don't have to. I just basically did everything
Yeah, yeah.
on the same one.
Did you put it, where did you put it?
I think it was for the other class.
I think it was too. It's for
Because
the
I think I
diagram.
accidentally didn't save my hello world one.
If you put it, I'll show you how to turn these in.
Yeah,
A
I
link would
submitted
work
it.
if you put it into like Google Docs.
Yeah.
Or you could do a link to GitHub if you were doing that. Again, I'll show you GitHub later. I think these early ones are a bit much to put on GitHub.
Yeah.
enter a number.
Tell you what, I'm gonna go use the restroom, and when I come back, we'll talk through this. It'll only take me a minute. You have a question?
Do
Okay?
that during this.
Well, actually, just put it instead of wide. Here, I'll just be.
No, change that. Yeah, I mean, whatever you want. For that.
So just hit that 5 line. If I was putting a shortcut around.
I don't have to do that. So what did you enter? And 5 pounds.
Okay, I just signed the last one. I just signed from 1, 21, 0 and 1.
So how are you guys doing? Do you need a minute, or you got it?
If I try to send the number, send it to
So what you want to do is you want to add another, first line like this. So up above it.
what about
Well, right, maybe
It would be.
right there.
this?
Yeah, and maybe just write like number.
This one?
We're gonna go over it.
Change the next line.
I don't know.
Don't worry about the word rack.
Oh, okay, so it's very much like this, except you already used that. So what you want to do is another eval.
You want to
So
do
that
something?
number,
Oh,
Just put.
maybe look at what I'll have them do here. So right here, where that blank line is, do, just like NUM, some variable, even Y, whatever you want.
Oh, in there. Long.
Yeah, equals, eval, and then in parentheses, input.
You're in one of my database classes.
Yeah.
One or both of my
Enter,
classes last fall.
how many loops you want, or how many numbers you want.
Okay.
There's some kind of, how many numbers you
That's
want.
my little, I know it's.
So I did that.
And then just say,
Yeah, it did.
Not Emacs.
well, you don't need a bit to me, just enter,
Enter.
for right now,
Turn
just
number,
leave it
I
at
did 25, and then I did up to 525.
well, just say enter a number,
What I don't know.
whatever, you can fix that.
It didn't go up to 525.
Okay, close, quotes.
So
You
print.
don't want
All right, now,
print
down
I.
here,
If you're
get a
using
tent.
I as
Do
your
what?
variable to define the
No.
number that you're doing, you don't want to print I, you just want to print X, and then you don't have to.
Right.
You know, why did I put 525? Oh, that's why. Because I took out something there.
It means something unique.
I
If I try to do
Yeah,
it,
what I was doing is,
and say,
so they can do that in the read.
Here's like a picture.
oh, I can change that. And then,
Yeah, that's Gmail.
This is TK that I should download. But it'll show you things like this is like in Whitespace,
so
implementation.
You have to have two different variables. That's
Like right here, you
Yeah, so you don't actually even have to.
But see where there's not a difference in here, the difference.
So that'd be the only thing we had.
Yeah.
okay.
I'd say that you take out
Yeah.
that chunk right there,
Now, if you
and
want,
then
One.
you're kind of
And so you can see like stuff like paint, there's a difference here, and you got like green, and I got new stuff here. There's a difference there.
So it's like a difference between the.
Yeah, so like, there's another class that, Bill and teaches inside operating systems like Git. Git does a lot of this merging and stuff, but you gotta be careful.
So it's
There, I
only
mean, there's
printed,
merging, but it's like the.
Oh, so look at that. it only printed the number 525, which is what I put.
You
So
didn't
it said print X, and I put this, print X, right?
and that's, you're just giving X that value, but you.
But I forgot that equation.
Yeah.
Look like you signed up.
I guess, let me show you. Like
This is what, yeah.
So don't worry about it now. Next time.
Yeah, I forgot. I needed to,
So let's do it together. Just shows like.
So-
file.
Yeah, the trick, so I'm going to, I think, go back to the one that has the def.
Not defining, you're trying to define I as a range that you want to give it. But then you're.
Are we ready?
defining
Are you guys working on this?
Like if you
Yeah.
want
When
your
I put the Y,
variables to represent.
Well, don't print Y, print
Right?
I
Then you need to
still.
make it
Print, these should still be X.
Oh, to the
Yeah.
So here I've got.
So I'm going to do this. What is it that you need to do to add the user?
Just take the line where you got X to copy and paste.
I'm
Make it a Y.
defining the range as Y.
Yeah, that's actually probably the easiest way. I was going to retype it, but you can just do like a Control C, Control V, change this to a Y, maybe change the prompt.
Right.
How many loops do you want to do, or enter the number of loops you want to do. And then in this, instead of 10, instead of doing a literal, just do the Y. And that's actually all you have to do. Let's run it and see.
Yeah, just hit that F5 to run.
Yeah, I know. I'm not a keyboard person.
Yeah, I remember the last class.
So enter a program between 0 and 1. So I'll just do 0.3. And did it die?
It looks like it. It looks like you, wow, enter a number between 0 and 1.3, but I
Oh, no, just-
3.6.1. That's really weird.
Well, the Python is 3.6.1.
Yeah, I know, but it just like added
Let's
the documentation right after your 0.3.
yeah, let's run it again.
Well, save it.
I did earlier. So this looks a little better. So I'm going to do 0.2. Enter the number of loops to do, and I'm just going to do.
Oh,
Nah.
yeah, okay,
Now I
take
can
out
put
I,
this.
take out the I part, I equals eval input, take that out.
I mean, we could do, if you run it again, you could do 50
And
or
then
whatever.
change your
Yeah, I threw in a
I
I,
in range,
comma,
1,
X to
comma X,
show the
change
iteration.
that to 1, comma X.
Oh, that you could do that.
Just the whole thing, take 1, comma X out.
Okay.
And then
That actually is kind of a nice idea. So if you wanted to do,
And then this is a no.
you could print
That's why. It's not three.
yeah, and then that needs to be under.
I. I'm going to do a colon.
I think that was all. Because I think you can input. No, maybe that's-
I'm actually not sure how this works if I were to put a colon in there. I don't know if that'll work.
What's in it? What's
I have
in?
no idea.
Infinity, it's going beyond, it no longer can solve it.
Computers are supposed to solve it.
Well, there's a couple of things that can cause it. They're actually beyond a certain range. The processor starts just producing garbage. The other thing is depending on the data type. So an int is only good for some billions.
So I went to the billions.
Yeah.
Good job.
There are other programs that have better precisions.
What's that?
There are some programs that have data types that are defined with better precisions. If you need to do particle physics or something.
Like finding time.
Yeah. So I'm going to run this again. I don't know if this will work, so I'm just curious. So I'm going to enter a program. So I'm going to say 0.2, and we're going to do 15 loops. And it did, actually. So I was curious if it would do that. I counted my loops. And I put a colon in there. Now it's a little uneven, which I could have fixed, but I'm not going to right now. So I'll show you how I did that again. Again, I'm just playing, and then we're going to do the next part, which will be relevant to the assignment. So I want to go back to, there we go. What I wasn't sure is if I could take a number, I can basically put in a colon and then another number, but it did it just fine.
Try a \T.
Which is a tab, yeah.
20.
And that should be in quotes too, right?
I don't know about that.
So I will save and run.
What to do?
So I will do a 0.3, and let's just do 5. That was for a tab.
That's fine. There's only 5 of them. So
Tab gives you a little bit wider space than you might want, but it does make it an even line.
It just makes that
Whatever.
semicolon thing
Range.
lined up.
5.
Yeah, but if I took the semicolon out, which I
Well, I mean,
could have, yeah,
They're saying it's orthogonal.
yeah.
And that's it.
All right. So is that enough place? So to turn this in, yeah, well, you get the points no matter what.
There's no 20.
So I'm just copying this. Here's one of the easiest ways to turn it in. So I'm going to go, I'm in Canvas as a student. This is peer assignment 1. And you can do a file upload or text entry, URL, Google Drive, or Office 365. Those are all ways to turn it in. I'm just going to do a text entry for right now. And I'm just going to, I just copied that code. And I'm just going to paste it in here. And then I'm going to submit it. That is the easiest way. Later, I will show you some other ways. Now, the other ways, I mean, if it's when they get a little more complicated, if you don't want to just do it as a text submission, you can put it into a Google Doc. And when we get doing a little bit more sophisticated things, I'll show you how to use GitHub. GitHub is a really good repository for your stuff, and it's an industry standard. If you're looking for a programming job, they're going to want to look at your GitHub repository. So it's good to know a bit about GitHub. So we'll do that, but we'll do it a little later. Right now, just entering it as text is fine.
If you enter it as text, it doesn't have the indent.
It doesn't have the
How do you
indent?
change it to carrier again?
I don't know if you can do that. So if you don't want to do it as a text, one of the things you can do is you can put it in a doc.
I promise it works.
You file save that for text?
No, I just uploaded the text, but it doesn't have the indents when I uploaded it. So I'm saying, like, it works.
Let me, yeah, I wonder how that looks. So it didn't have any of the indents, it
No.
was just,
It was just all like left justified.
all right, so what would be another way to
Mine's
do
got
it?
like 2 spaces, but it's an Arial font.
Yeah, I don't care about the font too much.
Can we just upload the file?
Yes, you can upload the file, the PI file. I don't know what that'll do, but go
Not
ahead.
As a PDF?
You could do it as a PDF if you want. I mean, that's maybe more work than you need to go to.
How about,
You could also put it in a Google Doc
I'm gonna do,
or Word. Word works well too.
but the text entry works too.
Text entry should work. I don't. I'm curious to see. So I'm going to leave student view.
Yeah. I mean, I submitted mine, so.
Yeah, and for these it doesn't matter. It may matter when we get something more complicated. I'm going to go to grades. Actually, what do? I want to go to speed grader. I'm only going to look at mine, the one I submitted.
Okay.
Well, that was a theory anyway. Even if you worked with somebody else, even if you just copied theirs exactly. So test student is what I wanted to look at. That's okay with me. It has enough of an indent on mine.
Okay.
If you want to do fancier stuff, if you want to put it like into Notepad, although this is a weird thing about Canvas, it reads a Word doc just like that. It reads a Google Doc just like that. A text document, TXT, it can take it 5 minutes to load.
It's the full text file.
What? Just a plain text file. It drives me nuts. I've never figured that out, why that is. Although if you put it into the text box here, it works just fine. It's fast. So, and then everybody that does this, notice most of the assignments have a rubric. This does not, because you just get the 5 points. I gave myself 5 points. All right. How are we doing for time? I want to do one more thing in Python, which is in chapter 2. It's partially because what it asks you guys to work on is the first assignment is basically, let's go find this again and go back to here. And I'm going to do assignment, and I'm going to look at the first one. But first, we're going to do something kind of like it. And again, I chose the assignments that that Stanny and others were doing just because I was trying to be consistent. These are not necessarily the ones I would have chosen, and I'll show you how to do other things too. This is exercise in chapter 2. It's number 10 of the programming exercise, and it's basically converting kilometers to miles. It's a real simple conversion. And the equation is there, I believe. 10. If not, it's a real easy internet thing to look up. I'm just looking at chapter 2, 10. We're going to do one more together. So programming exercise is 10. The conversion factor is 0.62. It's in the thing. All right, so let's do a different one, which is the temperature conversion. One of the things, if you look at enough programming textbooks, they all do the same problems. It gets boring, actually. It's hard to come up with really new ones, though. So I'm going to do a new file. And I will do the header. And as I said, for the assignment, I want you to do that. And I'm just basically going to say converts, and I think it was converting Celsius to Fahrenheit. I was going to do the one in the book. I could do either one. It doesn't matter. Yeah, they do convert Celsius to Fahrenheit. And I'll just put my name again. And the date, which is sometime in September. They lose track of time really quickly. And then I'm going to do the def main, because as I said, in general, I would like you to do that. All right, so if you're doing this, now one of the things that assignments have, not only assignments, all programs have, is, and I'm going to put this up here in the comments. You guys don't have to do this, but this is just for your, what are some of the things, there's 3 things that are take place in every program. Do you know what they would be? If you don't, that's fine. And I realize that's a very vague question.
Editing.
Well, so I'm thinking more of just on a logical level. You always have input.
Input,
Output.
execution.
Right, so you have input, and then you have the output, and then in between the two, you have, yeah, the execution or the processing might be another word too. I'm going to put all 3 words, execution. I'm also going to put, this is where the algorithm would be relevant, except you have to spell it. I think that's still wrong. Is there another I there? That's correct.
Yeah.
Even when I spell correctly, it looks wrong.
Yeah, that's just a weird word though.
Yeah. So every program you do, there's an input, right? You have to take things in order for the program to work. These inputs can come from the user. They could come from a file. They could come from a database, right? They're coming from into the program. Output is what you have when you've done all of your processing, when you've done all your calculations, when you've done all the things, you know, the analysis and different things that you need to do, the output is what you want. What would be the input to a Celsius to Fahrenheit program?
Celsius.
Right, the input will be the Celsius, I'll just say temp, but yeah, degrees. The processing is the equation, right? It's where you do the conversion, which, if I remember, I actually remember the other way better, is basically 9/5, 9 divided by 5 times the Celsius plus 32, or 30, yeah, is it 32? Yeah. What?
32, yeah.
Yeah, I was just looking to be sure. It's a weird, Fahrenheit is the weirdest temperature system in the world, I think. Celsius makes a lot of sense. Fahrenheit, I'm not sure.
English system of measurement. Nothing in the English system of measurement makes sense.
It's basically
It's
that.
a stupid system of measurement.
The output would be,
The output would be Fahrenheit.
it will be the Fahrenheit. Okay, so I just want to bring that in, input, output, and processing. Every program has that. Forms that you do input can be different, but it always has input. It always processes the stuff in order to create the output, what you're going to output. So we have def main, we need the input, right?
Right.
They also tell you kind of the order in which things have to be done. So I'm going to, so let's do Celsius equals eval input parentheses enter Celsius temperature, however you want to say your prompt. Okay, so that's our input. Again, this is pretty simple. Where's my cursor? Okay. All right, so we're just doing the Celsius temperature, and then we'll do the Fahrenheit. equals eval. Actually, it's not an eval. It just equals 9 divided by 5 times Celsius plus 32. And in our output, just do a print, right? Now, I don't quote, whenever you're doing a variable, you don't quote it because it's not a literal string, right? Only things that are literal strings should be quoted. This is a variable that we're using. And then the other thing we have to do, I mean, it's really this simple. You could do a prompt saying that it converts, what it does. Although I think that inter-Celsius temperature is fairly obvious. And then I'm just going to call Maine so that it runs. We run the method. Does that make sense? So I'm going to run this, which again means saving it. So I'll just call it temp conversion. You know what? I'm going to kill this and run it again. Just because the way the screen was. Not because of anything in the program, it's just the screen. All right, so I'm going to enter a Celsius temperature. The easiest way to check this would be like 100. What would 100 Celsius be Fahrenheit? No, it's 212. But why did that not work? Did I capitalize one place and not another?
Maybe.
I did. This one I capitalized. And actually the naming convention, it was capitalized. I changed it. It doesn't matter what it is in here. That's just a string. But so, what?
Generally, it would be better in your equation in here to write out Celsius equals and Fahrenheit equals.
Well, so there's a couple of things that we might want to do. So this came out to 212, which is correct. 100 Celsius is the boiling temperature of water at sea level, and 212 is Fahrenheit's temperature for boiling. So the equation is correct. However, this as a program, if you wanted to make this more useful, you would want to, you could print these out. I would certainly probably say something like your Fahrenheit temperature for, and then I'm going to do a comma, Celsius, comma, is, comma. I would do something like that to give a better prompt.
I
So,
just mean in terms of naming the variables.
oh, yeah, I think it's a good idea to name them. I mean, to give them a name that's clear. You could certainly, it would work just as fine if you said FC.
Yeah, I did FC and it works the same.
On a program this small, it probably doesn't matter. But when you get into a more complicated program, part of documentation is naming things so that it's obvious what they are.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense as you go into a deeper, more complicated program? In real life, too, it's fairly common. So if I do 0, it should be 32. Okay. It's fairly common for many people to work on programs.
Right.
Right, and when we talk about breaking it up into objects towards the end of the quarter, it's not uncommon that you'll say this group works on these objects, this group works on these objects, but it all has to come together. And naming conventions and naming things so that it makes good sense are really It's a really important habit.
Can I see your function again?
Yeah.
I feel like I've written it exactly the same, but it says Celsius is not defined.
So there's a couple of reasons that could be. Make sure that the case is the same. I did that wrong the first time. I did lower case
There it
there
is.
and capital there.
Yeah, that's what you did.
Typos, just in general, in programming in general, typos are more likely to be your error than logic.
Oh, print is not. Okay.
And in print, yeah, it's case
Typos
again. Yeah. So this is pretty simple. I mean, one of the things you could do if you wanted to is create a separate function or a separate one to do Fahrenheit to Celsius.
This one. I'm good about that.
As I said, what I would suggest, and Fahrenheit to Celsius, the equation for that, do you guys know that one? I think it's a 9 times 5 divide. I forget. I've done this. You just reverse this for the most part.
Yeah, it's
9 times 5 times Fahrenheit minus 32, but Fahrenheit minus 32 needs to be in parentheses.
I don't know.
Yeah.
To the Google.
Yes. What she said.
Isn't just a f minus 32 times 5 divided by 9?
Oh, right. Flip them. Yeah. That's right. 5 over 9 instead of 9 over 5. So, there were other questions that were started, but I didn't. You guys okay with these? Is it at least a little tiny bit fun, or are you feeling
Yeah, a little
confused?
bit. It's starting to make sense. SQL was simple. It was more intuitive for some reason.
SQL is meant to be a English-like language. This is, as languages go, it's not terrible.
Yeah.
You know, def, Maine, Celsius. The eval is a little weird, and I do think there's ways around that if you start typing your variables. Print can't get much easier than that. Some languages have echo for that, like PHP has echo. In the console, C# has console.write, and then what is it Java has? Depends on the it's system.print.out. It's actually from C.
Instead of just print.
Yeah, it's system.print.out. And then in parentheses what you're going to output. All right, so I think that's actually all I'm going to do today. You have like a half hour if you want to start working on the assignment, because I don't think it'll take you very long. I may be wrong, and if it does, don't get too panicked. But you can start working on that, or if you want to go enjoy the sunshine early, I will forgive that too. So I think that's all I'm going to cover for the day, though. Any other questions? We'll move up from these fairly simple things to things more complicated. But as I said, if you feel if you've never done this before, even this little bit might be a little complicated. So don't panic if it is. We'll get you through it.
I confuse myself. I get to learning it, and then I.
Well, that's fine. Actually, confusion is fine, especially if you work your way out of it. You know, yeah. So if you go, yeah.
What about the quiz?
So the quiz you can do anytime, and it's just a couple of multiple choice questions. And you can run it like 3 times. I think it's 5 questions that you can run up to 3 times. So we can use.
Okay, so would you suggest having those first? Because I don't think mine until later today.
Yeah, and there's no, the quiz will not go away, and I don't pick off ones for later.
Okay,
No, I think it's. lot of the questions in the quiz resemble the questions to think about, most like questions that have been practiced.
Okay.
Although I also.
Maybe.
Sorry. So if you guys need any help, let me know too. And as I said, you can work for a half hour or enjoy lunch.
I changed it.
Okay. Okay, are you gonna do it as a regular arts? Okay.
And then just mention that, and
That's fine. I'm gonna put the code that we did up on the blog, and the video I need to stop.
Can I see the other code?
Which one?
The middle one.
That's my problem.
The middle one.
The rank, the chaos code.
This is the chaos code.
That's the one I want to see.
Yeah. Sorry, I just wanted to kill the video.
Yeah, kill the video. I mean, I'll get my head off.